Dear friends, welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Dr. Nitesh Goyal from DAV College, Chandigarh. I am going to present before you the 13th module titled Sources of Data, Primary Data, under the paper Tourism and Hospitality Research. Dear friends, after the completion of this module, you will be able to understand the meaning of data, identify the various types of data, understand the methods of collection of primary data along with its advantages and disadvantages. First of all, friends, I would like to give you a brief introduction about the topic. Once the research problem has been formulated and the execution plan or the design has been decided upon, the researcher is required to collect the information and start seeking answers to the research under the inquiry. The present module aims or the purpose of this chapter is directed towards the understanding of the meaning of the data and its importance in research. Friends, you will also come to know about the types of data and their sources. In the last part of this unit, you will be able to make yourself understand the methods of primary data collection. So let's begin. Data. Research studies under the projection can use quantitative data, qualitative data or both type of data. Each of the above named approaches has its own advantages and disadvantages. Data actually refers to the distinct pieces of information usually expressed in a special manner. Broadly referring to data in its plural form means datum, a single piece of information. There can be different types of data like observational, experimental, simulation, derived or compiled, and the reference data. Now, why it is important? Determining the sources of data is one of the most important steps in conducting a research. Sources of data can be classified into primary and the secondary sources. A primary source, also known as first-hand information, includes all the data that is closest to the information or concept being examined. A secondary source, also known as the second-hand information, is the data that relates or discusses information actually presented elsewhere. In the primary source, the researcher would have collected the data directly from his own observations and experiences. However, if the researcher uses sources like research papers, journals, periodicals, and encyclopedias, he is said to have used secondary sources of data. In the present module, you will be studying about the advantages and disadvantages of primary data, the methods to collect the primary data, and the uses of primary data. The researcher uses several tools to execute as well as accomplish this task for the achievement of underlying objective. He or she collects, analyzes, and interprets the data so as to find the solutions to the research problem. The primary method of data collection is the most authentic and trusted method of data collection. Primary data is the fresh form of data that have not been collected and used before. Therefore, primary data helps in enhancing the authenticity, accuracy, and the reliability of research, and in most of the scientific researches, primary data are used. In this module, the main focus, however, is to discuss the primary data only. There are broadly two types of data, as already said, the primary data and the secondary data. Primary data is the information taken first hand by the researchers who collects the data and completes the study process without referring to any second-hand sources. Large companies with good funding prospects can perform primary research such as surveys, face-to-face interviews, social media surveys, polls, feedback, analysis of customer feedback, getting responses via email, etc. All these sources refer to the primary sources of data. The data which is collected by the researcher himself or herself directly from the original sources is called the primary data. The original source is called the source for data collection. For example, data collected by the researcher to understand the impact of children on the buying habits of parents in terms of mutual relationship of parents and children, age factor, education level, brand loyalty, brand awareness, etc. Primary data is collected through various methods such as observations, interviews, mailings, etc. Now let's see what are the different advantages of primary data. First, the research carried out is goal-oriented and is based on first-hand information, and there is high possibility of minimizing the wasting of resources. Second, the researchers at his own will change the course of study whenever needed and choose the platform as is suited to one's requirements. It is possible to capture the changes occurring in the course of time. As time progresses, many facts get changed. In this context, secondary data may not be very useful and the researcher needs primary data which is relevant as well as accurate. Third, it gives original research quality and is also free from biasness or the opinions of the third parties. It is an original source of data, so the collected data can be used for several purposes in the research study. Fourth, it is flexible to the advantage of researcher. Same data can be utilized by the researcher for multiple dimensions scientifically. Now, after having a look on the advantages, let's also look on the disadvantages of primary data. First, it involves huge amount of expenses as against the secondary research. A very high cost is involved in collecting data from the primary sources. Use of manpower, survey tools, etc. involves very high cost. Second, the procedure is more time consuming and hence accounts for huge amount of costs of assets. A lot of time is required in collecting data from various primary sources. Third, the outcome from research audience may not be always feasible. Fourth, it requires extensive research personnel who are skilled. Availability of skilled people for research work is also a big challenge in research study at any place. And finally, it is quite difficult to actually administer. Now, what are the different methods of collecting the primary data? Researcher uses original sources to collect the primary data. So, in this regard, the researcher collects the data according to the needs of the research. He collects the data according to the suitability of data, timeliness of data, and the need of the data. It is true that the primary data collection is a costly affair as well as time consuming. For many types of social sciences research, secondary data are not available. Therefore, it becomes difficult to conduct the research furthermore. In a situation where the available data is not pertinent to research study or available data are inappropriate or obsolete, primary data have to be collected. Various methods can be used to collect the data for the research study. A method is, however, different from a tool. The mode or way of gathering the data is known as the method, and the tool is an instrument that is used for that very method. So, the first method is the observation. Observation is a popular method of data collection in behavioral sciences. Under this method, the researcher personally collects the data in order to carry out the research at hand. If the data which have been collected through observation is free from biasness, then the data that is collected through this method acts as one of the most reliable form of information available at the hands of the researcher. Observation refers to the monitoring and then recording of the behavioral and non-behavioral activities and conditions in a systematic manner so as to obtain the information about the phenomena of interest for the study. Now, what are the advantages of observation? First, this is the only method that allows for collection of data in natural settings. Second, through observation, not only the verbal but the non-verbal behavior can also be observed and recorded. It allows for in-depth study of the phenomena. Third, in an observation survey, there is no time elapse between the occurrence and the recording of the behavior. Both of the tasks, that is, the occurrence and recording, are done simultaneously. Observation is a flexible method of data collection and is especially suitable for studying the social processes in depth over an extended period of time. Fifth, the observation method is particularly used in a situation where the respondents are either unwilling or unable to give the information. Now, let's take on some of the disadvantages or the limitations of the observation method. In case of observation, the phenomena which is to be observed not occur for a long time or it may occur sporadically. This makes it a very time-consuming and expensive method. Second, when observation is being done in natural settings, the researcher has little control over the variables that affect the data. Third, the analysis of data collected through the observation method is quite cumbersome. In the cases of structured observation, an observation checklist is already available. Hence, data can be thus easily analyzed. But when the observation is unstructured, then it becomes quite difficult or rather very difficult to quantify the relevant collected data. It has been seen that many a times the observer gets emotionally involved with the subjects. In such a situation, the research is infected by the observer's bias. The margin for interpretive error is greater in case of observation than in interview or questionnaire or some other method. The behavior recorded or observed is interpreted differently by different people. Wherever disguised observation is used, it raises the question of ethics. That is it appropriate to record or observe people without they being aware of it? In certain situations, it is difficult for an observer to gain entry into the study settings. For example, an organization may not allow an observer to record its workers' behavior. Observation method cannot be applied in a situation where the size of the sample is very large. Now the second and one of the most popular method is the questionnaire and schedules. Questionnaire method of data collection is one of the most widely and extensively used technique, especially in case the study is being conducted at a large scale. This method has been adopted by every type of researcher, whether he or she is an individual, an organization, whether private or government, or any such research agency. Under the questionnaire technique of data collection, a specified set of questions is sent to the persons who have formed the part of the sample, which are also called as respondents. This set of questions is termed as the questionnaires, which is sent with an expectation that the respondents will reply to the questions and return the questionnaire back to the researcher. Data collection through schedules is very similar to that of collection of data through a questionnaire, but not the same. The main difference lies in the fact that through a schedule, that is the document that contains the set of questions, the data is filled in by the investigator himself, who is specially appointed for this purpose. Such investigators, along with the schedules, meet the target respondents at their place or any such agreed place and get the schedules filled. So what are the advantages of a questionnaire method? This method does not suffer from an interviewer's bias. The questions to be asked are impersonal and standardized. Since the respondent fills the questionnaire himself, the interviewer's interference is minimum. Further, the questionnaires allow for anonymity. The respondent feels more secure since they are not answering face to face but writing the responses on a piece of paper. Hence, the answers will be given more freely. The questionnaire method does not put pressure on the respondent to respond immediately. Hence, this method is particularly suitable in the situations where the questions have to be answered after a careful and diligent thought. The impersonal nature of questionnaire ensures the uniformity from one measurement situation to another. Further, in case of mailed questionnaire, the supervision and the control effort is not required at all, since there is no need to appoint the field workers. Despite these advantages, the questionnaire suffers from some of the drawbacks also. The level of questionnaire may not match the intelligence level of the respondents. Even though simple words may have been used, yet all the respondents would not be able to understand the entire questions. The non-response rate is quite high in case of questionnaires. Many people do not fill the questionnaires at all and some do not bother to send them back. Also, in case of mail surveys, it is very difficult to know who has filled the questionnaire. It can be filled by anyone. The identity of the person filling the questionnaire is always doubtful. Since the questionnaires are filled by the respondents in their own hands, many times the writing is not legible and it leaves the form incomplete and useless. In studies where spontaneous answers are required, the questionnaire method is not suitable at all. The researcher has to accept the responses as they are written. The questionnaire method does not allow the researcher to clear the ambiguity in replies and check inconsistent answers. In case of mailed questionnaires, the researcher is unable to supplement the written replies with his own observation. This is the interview method. This method is also an important and a critical way to collect data that involves in it a planned and a systematic conversation that has taken place between the interviewer or the investigator and the respondent. Through this, one is able to get suitable, reliable, as well as the accurate information related to a specific research problem. With the use of this method of data collection, one can get near to a suitable range of data having both demographic as well as the social characteristics or both depending upon the research under question. In today's world, most people are highly practical in nature. For example, they would like to interact more rather than to write. So this method is much preferred as compared to other methods of data collection. By making use of this method, one gets an in-depth view of the problem which helps in correct diagnose and hence this further helps in probing as well as finding solution to the problem under question efficiently as well as effectively. So what are the advantages of the interview method of data collection? Interview as a data collection method enjoys a lot of advantages. An interview allows for gathering information in more detail. Since the interviewer and the respondent are having a communication, the doubts can be cleared, probing can be done, and wherever required, details can be asked. Interview method can be used to collect qualitative facts. The attitudes, ideas, feelings, views, opinions, and behavior can be recorded in an interview method. The interviewer gets an opportunity to observe and record the answers from very close quarters. Another advantage of interview method is that it allows for greater flexibility in the process of questioning, especially in unstructured interviews. The interviewer has the freedom of asking additional questions, changing the sequence of questions, and in certain cases changing the wording of the question also. A significant merit of this method is that the validity of the information provided can be readily checked. The interviewer is able to judge when the respondent is not giving true answers or is hesitant in giving the complete answers from the non-verbal cues given by the respondents. In this case, there is a very little chance of misinterpretation of questions and answers, especially in case of structured interviewing techniques. Despite these advantages, there are situations where a researcher might not prefer to use the interview method of data collection due to some of the disadvantages associated with this method. The interview method requires a lot of time. First, to seek out the respondents, then to ask questions and later on to analyze the answers. One estimate has shown that it requires approximately 6 to 9 hours to transcribe 1 hour of interview responses. Secondly, The variability in the data collected by interview can be caused due to interviewer's own characteristics. An interviewer's state of mind, his physical health, affects the way he asks the questions and the way he interprets them. His mood may make him look at a cup that is half full or a cup that is half empty. That is, he may look for positive interpretation of any of the respondent's answer, or on the other hand, he may look for some negative results in the same answers. Further, when more than one interviewer has been used to collect the data, then the extent of variation would also increase. Further, an interviewer's personality goes a long way in the determination of the confidence that the respondent will place in him, and hence the extent to which he will feel free and comfortable while responding. Another disadvantage is the cost involved in this method. It is quite expensive. The expenses has to be incurred on selecting, training and supervising the field staff that is conducting the interviews. The respondent may get affected by the presence of the interviewer. It may influence his response, whereby in order to give the right image to the interviewer, the respondent might give false answer deliberately. Lastly, the interviewer faces the dilemma of choosing a method for recording the answers. Wherever the use of audiovisual aids for recording is not allowed, there the interviewer should either know shorthand or should record the answers later, on which introduce the errors in the response recorded. Now, a little brief about the secondary sources. The type of data can be referred to be secondary in nature if the information provided by the data is not related to the purpose of the research project work. That is, secondary data relates to that kind of data collection in which data has already been collected but is not according to the research purposes but has been collected in general sense. Secondary data is readily available and the researcher himself has no control at all over the shape of the data as it has been collected by someone else. This type of data is basically referred to as the second-hand information. That is, the data that has been collected, compiled and presented in the past by the others and hence can be used as per the requirements for carrying out the investigation procedures. So friends, let's summarize the module. The data is one of the most important and vital aspects of any research study. Researchers who carry out the research activities in different fields of study can be different in their methodologies or the procedure, but every research is based on data which needs to be analyzed and interpreted to derive some meaningful results or to get information from it. It is the information that is taken first hand by the researcher who collects the data and completes the study process without referring to any second hand sources. In a situation where the available data is not pertinent to the research study or the available data are inappropriate, obsolete, the primary data have to be collected. The various methods of primary data collection and their respective advantages and disadvantages have been discussed in detail. Thank you.